The snow machine sitting in my locked shed had just been towed by the HOA, and I discovered this fact at the absolute worst possible moment in human history to discover such a thing. I'm Owen Marshall, and I've been living in Pine Ridge Estates for 3 years now, nestled up against the Wasatch Mountains just outside Park City, Utah. When I moved here, I thought the HOA would be reasonable. The rules seemed straightforward enough, the fees weren't outrageous, and the neighborhood looked pristine. What I didn't account for was Patricia Henderson taking over as HOA president 2 years ago and turning our quiet mountain community into her personal fiefdom. The morning started like any other February day in Utah. I woke up at 5:30, made coffee, and checked my phone for any emergency calls. I'm part of the Park City Mountain Rescue Team, a volunteer position I've held for 7 years. We respond to avalanche emergencies, lost hikers, skiing accidents, anything that requires immediate mountain rescue response in our area. My specialized snow machine, a custom-built ski-doo with rescue equipment modifications, stays in my shed specifically for these emergencies. It's equipped with a rescue sled, avalanche probe storage, medical supplies, and enhanced lighting systems that cost me nearly $40,000 to put together. I was halfway through my coffee when my phone rang. It was dispatch. "Owen, we've got a situation. Major avalanche on the backside of Jupiter Peak. Multiple skiers reported missing. We need all available responders immediately." My heart rate jumped. "I'm heading out now. 5 minutes." I threw on my rescue gear, grabbed my emergency pack, and rushed to my shed. The padlock was still in place, exactly as I'd left it. I unlocked it, swung the door open, and felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. The shed was empty. My snow machine was gone. For a moment, I just stood there, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. I'd used it 3 days ago for a training exercise. It had been right there. The tire tracks in the dust on the floor showed where it had sat. But now, there was nothing except an empty space and a bright orange citation sticker on the wall where my equipment rack had been. I ripped the citation off the wall. The HOA logo was stamped at the top, and Patricia Henderson's signature was scrawled at the bottom. Violation notice. Unauthorized recreational vehicle storage in violation of Pine Ridge Estates, HOA Covenant Section 12.4. B. Vehicle has been removed and towed to impound. Fine, $1,500. Contact HOA office for retrieval procedures. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. My phone rang again. Dispatch. "Owen, what's your ETA? We need that equipment." "My snow machine's been towed," I said, the words feeling surreal coming out of my mouth. "The HOA towed my rescue vehicle." There was a pause. "What? How is that even possible? Can you get it back?" "I don't know. I'm going to find out right now." I sprinted back inside and called the HOA office. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. It was barely 6 in the morning. I called Patricia's cell phone number, which I had from a previous dispute about my fence height. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice thick with sleep. "This better be important." "Patricia, this is Owen Marshall. You towed my snow machine from my shed. I need it back immediately. There's an avalanche emergency and people are dying." "Mr. Marshall," she said, and I could hear her sitting up, her tone shifting from sleepy to condescending in an instant. "Your recreational vehicle was in violation of our covenants. You were warned multiple times about unauthorized storage. It's not a recreational vehicle. It's emergency rescue equipment, and I never received any warnings. We sent 3 written notices over the past month. Your failure to read your mail is not my problem." I ran to my mailbox and rifled through the stack I hadn't checked in a week. Sure enough, There were 3 HOA notices buried in the junk mail and bills. I'd been so busy with work and rescue training that I'd let it pile up. "These notices don't say anything about towing," I said, scanning the documents. "They say I have 30 days to respond." The 30 days expired yesterday. The covenants are very clear. No recreational vehicles stored on the property, including in sheds or garages. I need that machine back right now. People are trapped on the mountain. This is life or death. The tow company opens at 8. You can discuss retrieval fees with them then, and you'll need to pay your HOA fine before we release the authorization. Patricia, you don't understand. Mountain Rescue needs that equipment. It has specialized gear that other machines don't have. We have maybe hours before hypothermia sets in for those skiers. That's not my concern, Mr. Marshall. Rules are rules. Perhaps you should have thought about that before violating the covenants. Have a good day." She hung up. I stood in my driveway, the morning cold biting through my rescue suit, staring at my phone in disbelief. Someone had actually just prioritized HOA regulations over human lives. I called dispatch back. "I can't get to my equipment. HOA president says I have to wait until 8 and pay fees." "We've got 6 people missing up there, Owen. The Avalanche field is massive. Let me try something else. Give me 10 minutes. I called Jake Rodriguez, another rescue team member who lived in town. "Jake, I need to borrow your machine. Mine's been impounded." "Are you serious?" "Man, mine's in the shop. Threw a belt yesterday." I called 3 more team members. One was already en route to the mountain with his equipment. 2 others didn't have snow machines. They were climbers who specialized in rope rescue. I called the towing company directly. Another voicemail. I left an urgent message explaining the situation. Then I made a decision that would change everything. I called the Park City Police Department and asked for a supervisor. "This is Sergeant Morrison." I explained the situation as clearly and quickly as I could. "I'm a credentialed mountain rescue volunteer. There's an active avalanche emergency with multiple missing persons. The HOA towed my specialized rescue vehicle from my private shed, and the HOA president is refusing to authorize its release until business hours. We need that equipment now. Give me the address of the impound lot and your information. I'll have an officer meet you there in 20 minutes. "Thank you, Sergeant." The impound lot was 15 minutes away in the industrial section of Park City. I drove there breaking probably a dozen traffic laws, but I didn't care. When I arrived, a police cruiser was already waiting. The officer, a young guy named Thompson according to his nameplate, got out as I pulled up. "You're Marshall?" "Yes, my machine should be in there." I pointed at the impound lot, which was surrounded by a tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Sergeant Morrison filled me in. "This is a pretty unusual situation." "I know it is. But those skiers have been buried for over 30 minutes now. Every minute matters." Officer Thompson walked to the gate and tried it. Locked. He pulled out his radio and made a call to dispatch, requesting contact information for the lot owner. We waited in the cold morning air while precious minutes ticked away. The lot owner finally called back. Officer Thompson explained the emergency. "I understand it's unusual, sir, but this is a rescue situation. We need access to emergency equipment that was impounded by mistake." I could hear yelling through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. "Yes, sir, I understand there are procedures. I'm asking you to expedite them. People's lives are at stake." More yelling. Officer Thompson's jaw tightened. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, I'm going to contact our supervisor and we'll explore options for forcing entry under emergency circumstances." "Is that really the route you want to go?" That seemed to work. 10 minutes later, a truck pulled up and an angry man in his 50s got out. jangling a massive keyring. "This is highly irregular," he muttered, unlocking the gate. "If there's any property damage, you're liable. Just show me where the snow machine is." He led us through rows of impounded vehicles, boats, and equipment. Finally, in the back corner, I saw my ski-doo. It looked undamaged, thank God. I did a quick inspection. Everything seemed intact. "I need to document this," the lot owner said. "Sign here acknowledging you're taking the vehicle." "I'm not paying the fees right now," I said. "Send the bill to the HOA or send it to me. I don't care, but I'm taking this machine and leaving." "That's not how this works." Officer Thompson stepped forward. "Under the circumstances, I'm authorizing the release of this vehicle for emergency use. Any fee disputes can be resolved later. Mr. Marshall, take your equipment and go." I didn't need to be told twice. The machine started on the first try. I gave Officer Thompson a quick thank you and drove out of that lot at full speed. The drive up to Jupiter Peaks Base took another 20 minutes. By the time I arrived at the rescue staging area, it had been nearly 2 hours since the avalanche. The scene was controlled chaos. Fire department vehicles, ambulances, other rescue team members, and a growing crowd of civilians who'd either witnessed the avalanche or heard about it. James Peterson, our team lead, ran up as I killed the engine. "Thank God. We need your sled and probe equipment. We've located 2 of the skiers. One's already been extracted, critical condition but alive. The other 5 are still buried." I unhooked the rescue sled and loaded it with probe poles and shovels. 3 other team members joined me, and we headed up the mountain to the avalanche field. The destruction was massive. A debris field of snow, rock, and shattered trees spread across hundreds of yards of mountainside. Other rescuers were already probing the snow in organized lines, searching for any sign of the buried skiers. "We've got a beacon signal," someone shouted. "Bearing 180, approximately 15 feet down." My team moved to that location and began digging. The snow was dense and heavy, compressed by the force of the avalanche. We dug as fast as we could, taking turns to prevent exhaustion. 12 minutes later, we found her. A woman in her 30s, unconscious, her face blue. We pulled her out, cleared her airway, and started CPR while calling for the medical team. She coughed, vomited snow and water, and gasped for air. "Alive." "Get her down the mountain," James ordered. "Continue the search." We found 3 more skiers over the next 2 hours. 2 were deceased. The third was a teenage boy who'd somehow managed to create an air pocket with his arm and survived in remarkably good condition. By noon, we'd located all 6 missing persons. 2 fatalities, 4 survivors. It was a better outcome than it could have been, but 2 lives were still lost. 2 families were getting devastating news that day. I helped pack up equipment, my body exhausted, my mind numb. We'd done everything we could, but that didn't make the losses easier. As I drove my snow machine back down the mountain, the reality of what had happened that morning started to sink in. The HOA had towed my emergency rescue vehicle from my private shed. Patricia Henderson had prioritized covenant enforcement over human lives. And if Officer Thompson hadn't intervened, if the lot owner had been less cooperative, the delays could have cost more lives. I was shaking with anger by the time I got home, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That evening, after I'd showered and eaten and tried to process the day, I started making calls. First, I called a lawyer friend named David Chen who specialized in property law. "David, I need advice on HOA overreach." I explained the situation. He listened without interrupting. "That's extraordinary," he said when I finished. "Let me ask you something. Is your snow machine registered as an emergency vehicle with the county?" "Yes, it is, through the volunteer rescue program." And you have documentation that it's designated emergency response equipment? Absolutely. Then they may have violated state law. Utah Code has specific provisions protecting emergency responders and their equipment. Let me do some research. In the meantime, document everything. Photos, timeline, copies of all notices and correspondence. Everything. I will. Thanks, David. My next call was to the local news station. I'd dealt with them before on rescue-related stories. I got through to a reporter named Michelle Vance who'd covered mountain rescue operations in the past. Michelle, I've got a story for you. HOA towed emergency rescue equipment during an active avalanche response. Wait, what? Slow down. Tell me everything. I walked her through the morning's events. She asked smart questions, verified details, and by the end of the call, she was clearly interested. This is a significant story, Owen. Can you go on camera? Yes. And I want Patricia Henderson to answer for what she did. Let me make some calls. I'll get back to you tomorrow. I spent the rest of the evening documenting everything David had suggested. Photos of my shed, the violation notice, the timeline of events, Officer Thompson's information, the impound lot details. I compiled it all into a folder on my computer. Around 10 that night, my phone rang. It was Tom Sullivan, another Pine Ridge Estates resident I knew casually from neighborhood gatherings. Owen, I just heard what happened. That's absolutely insane. Patricia Henderson is out of control. You're not wrong. Listen, there's a group of us who have been dealing with her nonsense for months. She's fined people for the color of their mailboxes, threatened foreclosure over garden gnomes, tried to ban solar panels. We've been talking about organizing a recall election for HOA president. Would you be willing to join that effort? Absolutely. What do you need from me? Come to a meeting tomorrow night. We're gathering at my place at 7. We need to build a coalition and file the paperwork for a recall. According to our bylaws, we need signatures from 20% of homeowners to trigger a special election. I'll be there. The next morning, Michelle Vance called me at 8. We're running the story tonight at 6 and 10. Can you come to the station at 4 for an interview? I'll be there. And Owen, I reached out to Patricia Henderson for comment. She declined an on-camera interview but sent a written statement. It's pretty defensive. I think this is going to get a lot of attention. At 4, I arrived at the news station and was led to a small interview room. Michelle reviewed the questions she'd asked, and we did a 20-minute interview covering the entire incident. How did you feel when you discovered your rescue vehicle was gone? She asked, panicked, terrified. We had people dying on the mountain, and my equipment that could save them had been towed over a bureaucratic dispute. It felt surreal, like it couldn't actually be happening. What would you say to Patricia Henderson if she were here right now? I looked directly at the camera. I'd say that HOA covenants, while important for community standards, should never take precedence over human life and safety. What happened yesterday was not just wrong, it was dangerous. If other emergency responders see this and worry that their equipment could be seized by their HOA, it creates a chilling effect that could cost lives. The interview aired that evening. I watched it at home with my phone silenced because I knew it would start ringing. Michelle's report was thorough and damning. She included aerial footage of the Avalanche site, interviews with other rescue team members, Officer Thompson's statement confirming the emergency response, and Patricia's written statement which read, Pine Ridge Estates, HOA enforces all covenants equally and without exception. Mr. Marshall was given ample opportunity to comply with storage regulations. The timing of the enforcement action and subsequent emergency was purely coincidental. The phrase, purely coincidental, was going to haunt Patricia Henderson. Within an hour of the broadcast, my phone exploded with messages. Neighbors expressing support. Fellow rescue team members outraged on my behalf. News outlets from Salt Lake City and even Denver requesting interviews. A producer from a national morning show asking if I'd be willing to fly to New York, but the most important call came from David Chen. Owen, I've done the research. Utah Code Section 73-24-103 provides specific protections for volunteer emergency responders. Your snow machine, as registered emergency response equipment, is legally protected from seizure or interference except in very specific circumstances. An HOA covenant dispute is not one of those circumstances. So what she did was illegal. It's certainly legally questionable. At minimum, it's tortious interference. At maximum, it could be prosecuted as obstruction of emergency services, which is a misdemeanor under Utah law. What are my options? You could file a civil suit against the HOA for damages and seek an injunction preventing future interference. You could also file a complaint with the county attorney's office for potential criminal charges, or both. Let's do both. I was hoping you'd say that. I'll start drafting the paperwork tomorrow. The next evening, I went to Tom Sullivan's house for the recall meeting. 17 other homeowners showed up, filling his living room and spilling into the kitchen. People were angry. Tom called the meeting to order. Everyone here has been affected by Patricia Henderson's authoritarian approach to HOA management. Owen's situation is just the most dramatic example. I think we all agree that she needs to be removed from office. Heads nodded around the room. According to our bylaws, Tom continued, we need signatures from 20% of the homeowners in Pine Ridge Estates to trigger a recall election. That's 43 signatures. We have 18 people here, so we need 25 more. That should be easy, someone said. After that news story, everyone's talking about it. We need to be strategic, I said. Let's divide the neighborhood into sections and go door to door. Have clipboards with the recall petition and explain exactly what we're doing and why. We spent the next hour organizing the canvassing effort. By the end of the meeting, we had a solid plan. Over the next 3 days, we collected signatures. The response was overwhelming. Homeowners who'd never been involved in HOA matters before were signing eagerly. People shared their own stories of Patricia's overreach. One couple had been fined for hanging a hummingbird feeder. Another family faced violations for children's chalk drawings on their driveway. A retired veteran had been threatened with foreclosure over an American flag that was supposedly too large. We collected 91 signatures, more than double what we needed. Tom filed the recall petition with the HOA board on Thursday. According to the bylaws, the board had to call a special election within 30 days. Patricia Henderson did not take it well. She sent an email blast to all residents that evening. The subject line was "Dangerous Precedent," and the message accused me of weaponizing a tragic accident to undermine legitimate governance, and warned that mob rule and personal vendettas would destroy the community's property values. The email was a strategic mistake. It reminded everyone of her callousness and made her seem petty and vindictive. 3 more homeowners who hadn't signed the petition came forward to add their names. Meanwhile, David Chen filed our civil lawsuit against the HOA and Patricia Henderson personally. The complaint sought damages for emotional distress, interference with emergency response duties, and violation of state protections for emergency responders. We also filed an emergency injunction to prevent any future interference with my rescue equipment. The lawsuit made news. Michelle Vance did a follow-up story. The national morning show flew me to New York for a segment. The story was gaining momentum beyond anything I'd anticipated, but the legal system moves slowly, even with emergency motions. The civil suit would take months to resolve. What happened next accelerated everything. On Friday, exactly 1 week after the avalanche, I received a call from the Summit County Attorney's office. A prosecutor named Richard Hayes wanted to meet with me. I drove to the county building in Colville that afternoon. Hayes was a serious man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and a firm handshake. "Mr. Marshall, thank you for coming in. I've been reviewing the incident involving your rescue vehicle. I've also consulted with the county sheriff's office and the State Emergency Services Division. We have concerns about potential criminal violations." "What kind of violations?" "Utah law treats interference with emergency responders very seriously. The towing of your vehicle, particularly given the timing and Mrs. Henderson's refusal to expedite its return during an active emergency, may constitute obstruction of emergency services under Section 76(8)(306) of the Utah Code." "What would that mean for Patricia Henderson?" "If we file charges and secure a conviction, it's a misdemeanor. That carries a potential sentence of up to 1 year in jail and fines up to $2,500. However, that's getting ahead of ourselves. I need to investigate further." "I'll need statements from you, Officer Thompson, the lot owner, dispatch records, timeline documentation, everything you have." "I've compiled most of that already for the civil suit. I can get you copies." "Perfect. I'll also be interviewing Mrs. Henderson and reviewing the HOA's documentation. This investigation will take a few weeks." I left the meeting feeling vindicated but also uneasy. I hadn't set out to get Patricia Henderson arrested. I just wanted my equipment back and to prevent this from happening again. But the law was the law, and if she'd broken it, there had to be consequences. The recall election was scheduled for 3 weeks out. The HOA board, which included Patricia as president and 4 other members, had to organize the vote. Patricia tried to stack the deck by setting the election on a weekday afternoon, clearly hoping for low turnout. Tom and our recall group responded by organizing a massive Get Out the Vote campaign. We printed flyers. We sent emails. We organized carpools for elderly residents who needed transportation. We made sure everyone knew the stakes. Patricia, meanwhile, was fighting back. She sent multiple emails defending her record and claiming that the recall was orchestrated by a small group of malcontents who want to turn Pine Ridge Estates into a lawless free-for-all. She held a town hall meeting that turned into a disaster when angry homeowners confronted her about various grievances. "You fined me $300 because my grass was 2 inches too tall," one man shouted. "I was in the hospital with pneumonia." "Rules apply equally to everyone," Patricia responded coolly. "Personal circumstances don't create exceptions." "My son drew hopscotch on our driveway with washable chalk," a woman said, her voice shaking. "You threatened to foreclose on our house over children's chalk." "The covenants prohibit defacement of property," Patricia said. "That includes driveways." The crowd turned hostile. People were shouting over each other. Tom tried to restore order, but it was clear that Patricia had lost any remaining support she might have had. The county attorney's investigation continued. Richard Hayes interviewed Officer Thompson, the impound lot owner, multiple rescue team members, and me several times. He subpoenaed HOA records and obtained the dispatch recordings from the morning of the avalanche. 2 days before the recall election, Hayes called me again. "Mr. Marshall, I'm filing charges against Patricia Henderson. Obstruction of emergency services, 1 count. We have sufficient evidence to proceed." "When will this happen?" A criminal summons will be delivered to her tomorrow. She'll need to appear before a judge for an arraignment. Given the nature of the charge and her community ties, I don't anticipate bail being an issue. This will proceed like any other misdemeanor case. Thank you for taking this seriously. We take anything involving emergency services very seriously in this county. Her actions put lives at risk. That's not acceptable. The next day, the news broke that Patricia Henderson was being criminally charged. Michelle Vance was the first to report it, having gotten a tip from a source in the county attorney's office. The story went regional immediately, then national by evening. The narrative was irresistible to news outlets. Authoritarian HOA president, emergency rescue equipment. Lives hanging in the balance. Criminal charges. It had everything. Patricia's response was to hire a lawyer and issue a statement through him claiming the charges were politically motivated and a vindictive prosecution driven by media hysteria. But the evidence was the evidence, and no amount of spin was going to change what had happened. The recall election took place on a cold Tuesday afternoon. The HOA had reserved the community clubhouse for voting. Despite Patricia's attempt to suppress turnout by scheduling it at an inconvenient time, the turnout was massive. Over 80% of homeowners showed up. I voted at 3, then waited with Tom and others at his house for the results. The ballot count would take a few hours since it was all done by hand by neutral HOA board members who weren't up for recall themselves. At 7 that evening, we got the call. Patricia Henderson had been removed from office by a vote of 187 to 26. It was a landslide. Tom was immediately installed as interim president, pending a special election for permanent board members. One of his first acts was to issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the HOA and to immediately suspend enforcement of the covenant that had been used to tow my snow machine. We're going to review all of our covenants, Tom announced at an emergency board meeting the next day. Any rule that doesn't serve a legitimate community purpose or that could interfere with safety and emergency services will be revised or eliminated. This HOA is going to start working for the homeowners, not against them. The civil lawsuit moved forward. With Tom now running the HOA, there was more willingness to settle. David Chen negotiated an agreement where the HOA would pay $25,000 in damages to me, issue a formal written apology, and permanently exempt all registered emergency response vehicles and equipment from any storage restrictions. The settlement also included a clause requiring the HOA to provide annual training to board members on state laws protecting emergency responders. Patricia Henderson, through her lawyer, tried to negotiate her way out of the settlement by claiming she'd acted in her capacity as HOA president and therefore shouldn't be personally liable. David shut that down quickly by pointing out that her refusal to authorize emergency release of the vehicle went beyond her official duties and into personal obstruction. She ended up paying $15,000 personally as part of the settlement. The criminal case took longer. Patricia's lawyer, a defense attorney named Marcus Webb from Salt Lake City, tried multiple strategies to get the charges dismissed. He argued that the statute didn't apply because the vehicle was in an impound lot, not actively being used for emergency services. He claimed Patricia had no way of knowing an emergency would occur. He suggested that the delay in retrieval wasn't significant enough to constitute obstruction. None of it worked. Richard Hayes presented a clear timeline showing that Patricia had been informed of the emergency, had been explicitly told that lives were at stake, and had still refused to expedite the vehicle's release. Dispatch recordings included my panicked call explaining the situation. Officer Thompson testified about Patricia's obstructionist attitude. The lot owner testified that he would have released the vehicle immediately if Patricia had authorized it. The case went to trial 4 months after the avalanche. It took 3 days. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Patricia faced up to a year in jail, though misdemeanor sentences rarely resulted in actual jail time for first offenders. Sentencing day arrived in late June. The courtroom was packed with media, homeowners from Pine Ridge Estates and mountain rescue volunteers who wanted to show support. The judge, a stern woman named Susan Caldwell, reviewed the case file before addressing Patricia. Mrs. Henderson, you were found guilty of obstruction of emergency services. This is a serious offense. Emergency responders put their lives at risk to save others. When you towed Mr. Marshall's rescue vehicle and then refused to expedite its release during an active avalanche emergency, you interfered with those life-saving efforts. 2 people died on that mountain. While the evidence doesn't suggest your actions directly caused those deaths, they certainly didn't help. Your willingness to prioritize HOA regulations over human life shows a profound lack of judgment and basic human compassion. Judge Caldwell paused, letting her words sink in. I've reviewed your history with the HOA. Multiple homeowners have come forward with complaints about your aggressive enforcement tactics. This wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was part of a pattern of authoritarian behavior that culminated in criminal conduct. Patricia's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. She's been a productive member of the community. We respectfully request leniency. Mr. Webb, I understand your position, and I do note that this is Mrs. Henderson's first offense. However, the nature of the crime requires consequences. I'm sentencing Mrs. Henderson to 90 days in county jail, with 30 days suspended. That means she'll serve 60 days unless she violates probation. She'll also be placed on supervised probation for 18 months, perform 200 hours of community service specifically with emergency services organizations, and pay a fine of $2,000 plus court costs. Patricia went pale. 60 days in jail was more than anyone expected for a first-time misdemeanor offense. Your Honor, her lawyer tried again, we would request that the jail time be suspended and replaced with additional community service. Request denied. Mrs. Henderson needs to understand that her actions have real consequences. She put lives at risk. A suspended sentence wouldn't adequately reflect the seriousness of that. 60 days is actually lenient given the circumstances. Patricia Henderson reported to Summit County Jail the following week to begin serving her sentence. Life in Pine Ridge Estates changed dramatically after everything that happened. Tom Sullivan ran for permanent HOA president in a special election and won easily. He assembled a board of reasonable people who understood that an HOA's job was to maintain property values and community standards, not to terrorize homeowners over trivial issues. The new board rewrote the covenants. Reasonable restrictions remained. Nobody wanted junked cars on lawns or houses painted fluorescent orange, but the petty nonsense ended. Kids could draw with chalk. Hummingbird feeders were allowed. Mailbox colors were deregulated. Solar panels were explicitly permitted. And emergency responders received complete exemptions for any equipment or vehicles necessary for their duties. I continued my work with Park City Mountain Rescue. My snow machine stayed in my shed, undisturbed and ready for the next call. We responded to dozens of emergencies over the following months. My equipment helped save lives. The 2 families who lost loved ones in the Jupiter Peak Avalanche reached out to me privately. They didn't blame me for what happened. Avalanches are unpredictable and deadly. The delay in getting my equipment hadn't changed the outcome for their family members, who'd been too deep in the snow and had run out of air before any rescue could have reached them. But they appreciated knowing that someone had fought to get there as fast as possible, and they were glad that the system had been fixed so it wouldn't happen again. Michelle Vance won a regional Emmy for her reporting on the story. She thanked me during her acceptance speech and used her platform to advocate for stronger legal protections for emergency responders across the state. David Chen sent me a final bill for his legal services. It was surprisingly modest given the amount of work he'd done. When I called to thank him, he laughed. "Owen, you gave me the most interesting case I've had in 5 years, and we won. That's worth more than billable hours. The civil settlement money helped offset my legal costs and compensated me for the stress and hassle. More importantly, it established a precedent. Other HOAs in Utah and beyond took notice. Emergency responders in other communities who'd faced similar issues came forward. State legislators started discussing laws that would provide clearer protections. Something good was coming out of the madness. Patricia Henderson served her 60 days and was released in late August. She moved out of Pine Ridge Estates within a month. Word was she relocated to Arizona. I never saw her again and had no desire to. Tom ran into me at the grocery store one Saturday in September. We'd become good friends through everything that had happened. "You know what's funny?" he said as we stood in the produce section. "Property values in Pine Ridge actually went up after Patricia left. Turns out people want to live in a community with a reasonable HOA, not a police state." "Who would have thought?" I said. "We've got 3 families moving in next month. All of them specifically cited the new HOA policies as a reason they chose our neighborhood. One of them is a firefighter. He was worried about storage for his gear, but I assured him we'd never have that problem again." I smiled. "That's exactly what should happen." That winter brought heavy snow to the Wasatch Mountains, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. My rescue team responded to 18 avalanche calls between December and March. My snow machine performed flawlessly every time. The specialized equipment that I'd invested so much money and time into saved lives. And every single time I opened my shed and saw that machine sitting there, ready to go, I felt grateful. Grateful that Officer Thompson had helped me that morning. Grateful that David Chen had fought for what was right. Grateful that Tom Sullivan and the other homeowners had stood up to an authoritarian board member. Grateful that the legal system had worked, even if it took time. But mostly, I felt grateful that we'd created change. Real, meaningful change that would protect other emergency responders from going through what I'd experienced. One evening in early April, I was sitting on my back deck watching the sunset paint the mountain peaks orange and purple. My phone rang. It was James Peterson from the rescue team. "Owen, we're doing a training exercise next Saturday. New volunteers need to see how the equipment works. Can you bring your machine and walk them through the modifications?" "Absolutely." "What time?" 10 in the morning. Base of Park City Mountain Resort. "I'll be there." Saturday came with perfect spring weather. Clear skies, mild temperatures, the kind of day that reminded you why people loved living in Utah. I loaded my snow machine onto my trailer and drove to the resort. 15 new volunteers were gathered when I arrived, eager and nervous. They ranged from college students to retirees, all united by a desire to help their community and save lives in the mountains they loved. I spent 2 hours showing them the equipment. The rescue sled that could transport an injured person. The avalanche probes that could detect someone buried under snow, the medical supplies, the communication systems, the specialized lighting that could turn night into day. This machine has been involved in over 200 rescues, I told them. It's saved dozens of lives, but it's just equipment. The real difference is made by people like you who are willing to show up when the call comes, who'll dig through snow until your arms give out, who'll work through exhaustion and fear because someone's life depends on it. One of the volunteers, a young woman probably in her early 20s, raised her hand. I saw the news story about what happened with your HOA. That must have been terrifying. It was, I admitted, but it taught me something important. Systems only work when people make them work. When Officer Thompson decided to help instead of citing procedures, he made the system work. When my neighbors signed that recall petition, they made the system work. When the county attorney prosecuted the case, he made the system work. We all have the power to do what's right, even when it's inconvenient or difficult. The training continued for another hour. The volunteers practiced using the equipment, learned search patterns, studied avalanche behavior. They asked good questions. They took it seriously. As we were packing up, James pulled me aside. "That was great, Owen. These new people needed to hear your story. It reminds them what this is really about. Happy to do it anytime. Actually, I wanted to ask you something. The county is creating a formal mountain rescue advisory board to work with emergency services and make sure we have proper support and resources. They asked me to recommend people. Would you be interested? What would it involve? Quarterly meetings with county officials, helping shape policy, advising on budget for rescue operations, working with other agencies. Basically making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. I'm in." Over the next year, the advisory board accomplished a lot. We helped draft county policies that explicitly protected emergency responders and their equipment from HOA interference. We worked with the county attorney's office to create clear guidelines about when obstruction charges were appropriate. We established a rapid response system so that if an emergency responder ever faced equipment seizure, they could get immediate county intervention. We also worked on funding. Mountain rescue in Utah, like in most states, was largely volunteer-based. We were passionate and skilled, but we often paid for our own equipment and training. The county allocated a budget to help offset those costs and to purchase communal equipment that could be used across different rescue teams. The work was tedious sometimes, lots of meetings and paperwork and bureaucratic processes. But it mattered. Systems and policies could save lives just as surely as rescue equipment could. Pine Ridge Estates continued to thrive under Tom's leadership and the new board. The HOA actually functioned the way it was supposed to, maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, enforcing reasonable standards that protected property values without destroying quality of life. They started an annual community appreciation barbecue. The first one was held in July, and they insisted I be the guest of honor. I tried to decline, uncomfortable with the attention, but Tom wouldn't hear it. "Owen, you did more than fight a bad HOA president. You reminded all of us that we have power when we stand together. That's worth celebrating." So I went to the barbecue. Probably 200 people showed up. Kids ran around playing. People grilled burgers and hot dogs. A local band played covers of classic rock songs. It felt like a real community, people who cared about each other rather than just trying to enforce rules on each other. Several people came up to thank me throughout the day. The veteran who'd been hassled about his flag. The couple with the hummingbird feeder. The mom whose kids had drawn chalk hopscotch. All of them felt liberated from Patricia's authoritarian regime. "I actually like living here now," the mom told me. "Before, I was stressed every time I went outside, worried that something would be in violation. Now I can just enjoy my home." That was what an HOA should enable, people enjoying their homes. As the sun set and the barbecue wound down, I stood talking with Tom and a few other board members. Someone asked if I'd ever consider running for the HOA board myself. "No," I said immediately. "You all are doing a great job. I've got enough on my plate with rescue work and the county advisory board, but I appreciate the vote of confidence." "Fair enough," Tom said. "But if you ever change your mind, you've got my support." The years that followed were good ones. My work with mountain rescue continued. We saved lives. We lost some people too, because mountains are dangerous, and sometimes we can't get there fast enough or the injuries are too severe. But we did everything we could, every single time. Patricia Henderson's case became something of a landmark. Law schools used it as an example of when HOA authority crosses into criminal territory. Emergency services organizations cited it in training. A few other prosecutors around the country brought similar charges in comparable situations, establishing that obstruction of emergency services wasn't limited to physically blocking responders, but could include interfering with their equipment. I stayed in touch with the families who'd survived the Jupiter Peak avalanche. The woman we'd pulled out, the one who'd been blue and unconscious, made a full recovery. She sent me a Christmas card every year with photos of her family. "Thank you for not giving up," she wrote in the first one. "Because of you, my kids still have their mom." Those were the moments that mattered, not the news coverage or the legal victories or even the systemic changes. The individual lives that continued because people showed up when it mattered. 5 years after everything happened, I was training a new group of rescue volunteers on a crisp October morning. The leaves were changing colors, painting the mountains in brilliant reds and golds. We were practicing rope rescue techniques on a cliff face when someone's radio crackled. "All units, we have a report of an injured hiker on Bald Mountain, possible broken leg, rescue response needed." I looked at the group of volunteers. "Okay, this is what we train for. Real situation, real person who needs help. Let's show them what we can do." We mobilized quickly, efficiently, everyone knowing their role. The coordination was beautiful. Within minutes, we were en route. As I drove my snow machine up the mountain trail, the same machine that had been at the center of so much drama years ago, I felt the familiar surge of purpose. This was why I did this work. This was what mattered. We reached the injured hiker, a middle-aged man who'd slipped on wet leaves and badly fractured his tibia. We stabilized him, administered pain medication, secured him to a rescue litter, and transported him down the mountain. The new volunteers performed flawlessly. By the time we reached the ambulance, the hiker was stable and already expressing gratitude. "Thank you so much," he said through the pain. "I didn't think anyone would find me out here." "That's what we do," I told him. "Someone calls for help, we show up." Simple as that. As I drove home that evening, satisfied and tired, I thought about how far things had come. From that morning of panic and frustration when my equipment had been towed, through the legal battles and media attention and systematic reforms, to this moment of routine competence in saving a life. Systems mattered. Laws mattered. Standing up to petty authoritarians mattered. But at the end of the day, what mattered most was showing up when someone needed help. Everything else was just details. My shed still held my snow machine, along with all the specialized equipment I'd accumulated over years of rescue work. The HOA never bothered me about it again. Tom retired from the board after 6 years of excellent service, replaced by another reasonable person who understood what community really meant. Life went on, seasons changed, mountains stood eternal. And when the call came, no matter what day or time or weather, I was ready. Because that's what you do when you choose to be the kind of person who shows up. You show up every single time.